So, questions, issues, concerns, high level, detailed level. We've got an hour. I'd love it if you guys didn't have to stay that long.
Yeah, Jason, did you put in, we had talked a little bit about some truck loading zones only in the morning. Were they in there on Main Street to accommodate when the trucks, delivery trucks are?
Loading zones are in reaction to what the businesses need. And I would simply take any stretch that's parallel parking and sign it for loading only during certain hours. And I'm always recommending, 8 a.m. to noon, because after that, most trucks want to be out of downtowns. They start on earlier shifts, and after that, you really need the customer parking more and more starting at noontime. So I would make it, set time of day, and whatever spots of parallel parking make the most sense.
Just in regards to the loading zones in the morning only, FedEx and UPS, I get a lot of deliveries in my office, are actually there all day long. They pick up. In the afternoons, they pick up in several spots downtown at like 5:45. So I don't know if it's, I don't think just morning only with.
I am guessing that without a doubt now, if you were to do something like this, FedEx and UPS would do exactly what you kind of want them to do, and what UPS's policy is: turn right and only turn right, and they'll go to the side street and pull over on the side street instead. Because you don't want to let. And UPS luckily won't park in your travel lane. They can today because you have excess capacity. That's why they can stand in that lane. Other concern?
I have a question about those textured crosswalks.
Yep.
It's always struck me as sort of silly that by the time a pedestrian can hear you rumbling across, they're 10 feet away from you. Or by the time you're as a driver, hear the rumbling and go, oh, I'm in a crosswalk, we're in the crosswalk.
Oh, right, absolutely.
Yeah. It always seemed to me it would make more sense to have the texturing be far enough away so that there's a reaction time for the pedestrian and the driver.
The best thing possible is a visual cue. I don't think anybody expects that the texture is going to be all that much of an impact, especially in New England where roads go to pot so quickly. The idea of, for instance, on Main Street, where I'd suggested in front of City Hall having some sort of texture, is only valid because it's a pretty nice zone at the point of inflection of the curvature. But it's also an environment where folks are already going slow. I don't need to give them much more warning. And in fact, because it's spanning the whole street like that, you'll see that coming from afar. But for normal crosswalks, international bars, the city standard that's out there right now, is absolutely the way to go. It's all about what the driver sees. Rumble strips are good at 70 miles an hour on the edge of a highway. But beyond that, texture doesn't have a huge impact until, if you're right, it's too late. You, sir.
So, on Main Street, the bicyclist travels with the automobiles. I'm an experienced one, so it wouldn't bother me, but most people, I think, are going to have a problem with that.
And now that's probably why most people today are using the wonderful multi-use path to go around downtown. I think what we're trying to strike a balance of here for cyclists is that as you, I don't know if I have a good overview map that I can just sort of show this, but I guess we start to get there. As you come into downtown, a bicycle facility makes all the sense in the world. We've even drawn them on West Street here. I'm not 100% certain that West Street can lose the left turn lane, but at the very least you could fit it in. And the idea is that if you're on a street that is not active in and out uses, where drivers are sort of already thinking a parked car may move or a pedestrian may come out, the cars are dominant. They're going to go faster than the bike. And in those environments, it's very good to provide a dedicated bicycle facility, especially as speeds go up. But as you start to get into an environment where you're trying to slow the cars down, where you're getting the right kind of performance and yielding behavior, that's where an extra dedicated bicycle facility might actually hurt you, because it creates extra pavement width, reduced friction, and the driver feels like they got a little bit more roadway to play with. And that's, unfortunately, one of the results of a lot of studies that have been coming out about cycle tracks versus bike lanes. Even the big premium bike lanes, they allow cars to go a little bit faster because there's no friction. Whereas if that curb's brought out, the curb is enough to make people think I can't go super fast. That's sort of the philosophy here. You're so lucky, though, I mean, if you really want a dedicated bicycle facility in your downtown, guess what? You've got like premium multi-use path right in your downtown. I mean, I can't think of places, very many places that have that kind of flexibility. You can, as a vehicular cyclist, you can be on the main street. As somebody who's a little bit less aggressive like me, we just widened all the sidewalks 100%. And if you're somebody who's really just there for the recreational fun of it and will then walk to something after you park your bike, you've got the multi-use path. You've got all level of facility for a cyclist in your downtown. You also, sir.
Just wanted to say, didn't go to any of the previous meetings. I generally love all this, and I'd love to see it all happen. I was wondering about the bike track. Is there? You said there's a sort of material or a wall separating it. Is that sort of like a curb height thing?
It would probably, we're guessing it would either be another granite curb or a paver type edging or something like that. Almost the rumble strip for the cyclist, but you want, in case the cyclist to go that way, to actually ride on it and not hit soft shoulder and fall into the street. I mean, any cyclist on a 6-foot wide cycle track next to King Street is not going to be getting too close to that edge anyways.
And is this something that can be plowed in all of the...
Yeah, that was the point, was that you could make a surface that you could just run. You could even run at 6 feet wide, you know, a pickup with a plow on it and just plow off the whole cycle track and keep it open all winter long. Or, of course, a sidewalk type plow with brushes could do that too.
Okay. And I had another question. On King Street, I live way north, just before Hatfield by
Yep.
the state police. So I was wondering about just north of Damon Road, when it goes under the exit ramp for 91,
Yeah.
it tapers down to 1 lane, then back out to 2 lanes. Did you?
That's a tough environment. We didn't spend a lot of time focusing there, and I have to apologize for that. It's a tough environment to do a lot of change for a couple of reasons. It's extremely auto-oriented. It's also almost entirely under the control of Mass Highway, who, you know, they've seen this in downtowns, but in that environment, they would be like, what are you talking about? I would guess changing that environment significantly is probably out a lot further in your future. That said, as far as I know, the Mass Highway preliminary design for Damon and King is actually have a sidewalk continue up from there. There's no sidewalks other than like one approach. It would actually continue from there up to the big wide plaza at the very least. And how it passes the highway off-ramp would just probably be a little staggered crossing. Somebody's thinking about it at least.
Yes, I really like everything I saw today and last night. I have a question about a problem area that we experience sometimes. If you go back to the Main and King intersection.
Yep.
Right. So if you follow Main Street to the right, there's the bridge, the 2 bridges.
Right.
And then there's Market and Holly Street.
Right.
And what happens a lot of times around 5, 6 o'clock is that intersection turns into gridlock.
Right.
People are coming into town, they're on Market, they're coming in everywhere, and that area right there to the right, right there where that pointer is, that gets so clogged with cars that it backs all the way back up underneath the bridges.
Right.
And I'm wondering what this plan would do to that.
I actually have
It
that
happens at noon sometimes.
somewhere. I failed to bring that in, I just realized. I think, is this it? This is it. Is that it? Yeah, that looks like it. Yeah. Not quite getting to there, but close. So this is that stretch where, again, you need the roadway capacity, but you can narrow up, because it operates as 2 lanes today. I can't buy you a lane under there without taking out parking, of course. That may be necessary. We didn't have time to run the models on that particular intersection. But what I do know, and again, I don't actually have a picture of the next part of the drawing, but we can get that to you. It more or less ends at Market. Holly, is that right? There's not a lot of space at that intersection to really change things dramatically. You might be able to squeeze in a turn lane or something like that, which might be able to help it a little bit. And then there's the trade-off over how long the crosswalks become. I think that intersection is a a lot simpler intersection design process. But we recognize that this would be a really good spot to be able to keep the parking. We've actually, believe it or not, we actually put in a narrow 5-foot sidewalk down in where the cars today pay at those short little meters and you get out and you like run to get up to the real sidewalk. So we actually added a parallel sidewalk that drops down because there's enough room to do that. And, you know, I guess technically, therefore, there would be enough room to instead add a turn lane when you get to the other side. I'm just not confident that'll help.
And a lot of what happens now is cars that are stopped at the King Pleasant intersection, it just backs all the way up underneath those bridges.
Oh, right
Yeah,
here.
and if we change the intersection at King and Main, and it cycles faster, is that gonna keep that from happening?
What's happening today is that you get a very large queue due to the length of the signal. As soon as you reduce the cycle length, the queue doesn't get as large. So you can process more cars in that amount of time. It's not to say that the delay will necessarily get better, but the amount of what's going to happen is, as you come underneath the bridge, if you happen to see that it was green, you ain't getting it. Whereas today, if you come underneath the bridge and you happen to see it's green, if you kind of keep your foot on the pedal, you'll get it. Well, the way we're changing is you won't give up on it. But the overall amount of time it'll take you to then wait in your queue and eventually get through on the next light cycle won't be any more.
Will be less.
It'll be about the same. The overall amount of time. The delay is basically how long it takes to get from point A to point B. And today, you get up to this point really well, but then wait really long time, and then you can go. And what we're saying is tomorrow is you may be going a little bit slower, realize you can't get through the red, no need to rush it, and then you may wait, you may actually wait back here, and then you wait again at the light and go, or something like that. Sir?
First, let me give you some compliments of very practical and very innovative ideas here. I have a question that must have come up in one of the earlier charrettes about snow removal.
Yes.
DPW does a great job of, they obviously can't plow to the curb in downtown for practical reasons. So they plow to the center, use it as a retaining area, and then come back to it as their work with the rest of the town allows. But the plans that you put forward pretty much eliminates that sort of that bankable space in the middle. What's your answer to that?
The only downtowns in New England that I know of, there's probably a couple others I can't think of, the only downtowns in New England with this level of activity that plow to the center are Northampton and Concord, New Hampshire. And the only reason is because the street's super wide and they can. Every other downtown main street gets the snow out of there. And you know, you're already using payloaders to get the piles out when you can anyways. In many communities, that's what it is. I think the one other side benefit of creating a lot of this curb space is to remember that, no, that's the wrong one.
Concord, New Hampshire is where the revolution began, isn't it?
Yeah, which revolution? That's what I want to know. Is that, you know, there's, you know, maybe this is a nice cafe or this is a nice cafe in the summertime, but it's great snow storage in the wintertime because there's not too many people eating outside. So there's a nice area to pile some snow. So that, you know, it would have to change operational practices, but I would absolutely not. I mean, they're not giving you room to store snow in the middle of your street. The fact that you can't store snow in the middle of your street means you've got too much capacity.
I don't know if this is part of the project, but I'm sort of interested in whether you've made any recommendations about the Amtrak station and how parking for that and all would fit with the transformation of these two.
We'll definitely try to address it in our text, but the basic principle of transit node like that is doing as much as you can to make it accessible by every mode other than the car, and then bring in the car last. And what's amazing from transit riders, from transit agencies' perspectives around the country is what they have learned, and yet they still have to deal with the politics of providing park and ride. Park and ride is a really bad way to get ridership, ironically. You know, you still need them for people who are on highways near your highways. But in your downtowns, the best way to get ridership is to have as much activity, access by bus, bike, and pedestrian around that station. That's the fundamental point of real transit-oriented development. So many of which are a building next to a train station with a ton of parking, which sort of defeats the whole point. The idea is, if you are encouraging a strong level of mixed-use activity near that node, so many other trip purposes that might have happened in the car can happen by foot. And then what's really cool is communities that still feel like there's not quite enough in their downtowns and for somebody to come off the train, they can successfully have their park and ride parking remotely. For instance, if you had your train station near Main Street, you could actually have a remote lot a little ways up King Street as some form of a redevelopment maybe, with a nice, hey, you've got a multi-use path that connects it already. But the key is, if those people are walking along your Main Street, these communities use those regular train riders as part of what keeps the florist going, the local coffee shop, the newspaper stand, etc., because they're a captive market that has to walk on their main street. So having commuter rail type parking a little bit further out, we're not talking more than 5 minutes, we're talking less than that sometimes. Just a little bit further out, even the garage in downtown. Great place to park, to get on the train. Walk through down Main Street, Northampton to get to the train. That would be really neat. The other benefits of overall reduced trip and travel reduction are huge. To be able to provide a market of folks who live in a downtown, a higher density use destination, a destination where the train can roll in, is huge. I mean, that's what Portland, Maine is trying to figure out right now. They got the successful Down Easter coming up from Boston. I ride it all the time when I go up there. It's phenomenal, but it stops you on the outskirts of town. You got to take a cab in. And the whole reason they didn't want to put it on the waterfront where it used to be, right into their commercial street, was, yeah, but that's where all the trucks are now. That's where all the traffic is now. And luckily, they've started to also realize, wait a minute, this is our street. And that's just recently been decided they're going to start looking at that alignment again. Even if the train can't go through to New Brunswick or Brunswick, Maine and Bangor, they're going to realize that that train station in the downtown is huge. It's your Penn Station, it's your Grand Union, it's your South Station, it's all those great stations of the world in downtowns. Big hit.
So what about the people that are coming down from the hill towns, from Williamsburg and all, and want to get a train down to Springfield to their job or to Hartford?
Believe it or not, for that kind of a trip, unless your drive segment is really heavily congested between here and Hartford or Springfield, which today I-91 is not, there's not a lot of people who are going to jump on the train because it's not really going to go any faster than driving. Maybe their drive when they get to Hartford is really, really bad and the train station happens to be near where they work. So they'll be attracted, and so those folks would be happy to maybe walk 3 minutes after they park the car to get to the train station. But parking them at the train so they can get in and out means they're just driving out of your downtown when they're done. So, I wouldn't think this train station initially is really going to be a commuter thing as much as it's going to be a business travel or leisure travel thing. Eventually, when 91 becomes a lot more congested, or for the few who have those issues like I talked about, I can see it being a regular commuter route too. I don't think they're talking about those frequencies yet either. Sir?
What happens if the price of oil stays at these levels or even goes higher?
It will. It absolutely will, and that's going to hit people's wallets more. There's no question in my mind that, we're going to, relative to current dollars, you're going to be looking at $10 a gallon gas at some point in time in our lifetimes. I mean, certainly within the next 50 years, if not sooner than that. But that's a dollars and cents thing for most people. Right now, it costs 50 cents a mile approximately to drive anyways, but nobody thinks about that. But that's just the bundled reality cost of financing your car, paying for the gas, paying for its maintenance, dealing with your insurance, and dealing with the infrequent repairs. And that's what it comes out to right now. So, yeah, it helps the gas prices will go up and drive more people onto a train and walking and all these other things we're talking about. Question over here.
I like so much of what I've seen, and I like the intermodal aspects of all of it. On King Street, I like the roads on it. My question is about the cycle track, which in the bicycle advocacy community is usually looked at with skepticism because of the safety issues that arise from all the curb cuts. So every car turning into a curb cut is a potential crash with a bicyclist that they didn't see because they weren't right on the roadway.
Right.
So are you aware of examples where this has worked and where safety is demonstrably better?
Yeah, so first of all, there's just been a study released that I saw that compares the two. A place, and I can't remember which community, had a super beautiful bike lane on one street that it dropped the parking lane on, and on another street it dropped the parking lane on, it brought the curb out and put in a super beautiful cycle track. And the safety numbers and the vehicle speeds and all were better with the cycle track there. For the intersections, I entirely hear what you're saying, which is why we have the cycle track in the exact same spot the bike lane would be. It provides the level of safety, but the driver still knows the cyclist is right there. In fact, the driver's really going to know the cyclist is right there because the cyclist is elevated even more, they're going to see the cyclist. And then it really comes down to something really important, I think, for whatever form of development you do anywhere on this corridor, is curb cut design. Curb cuts are so frequently just, turn the cars in, forget what else happened, and that's not the era we're in. We're talking about who's walking along the street. What are the other modes doing? And so curb cut design should all be about a tight, slower speed corner where you as a car physically go up on a lip onto the level of the sidewalk, or in this case, the cycle track and then the sidewalk, before you get into that parcel. Over here, yeah.
I have a question about varying widths of streets and lanes, and especially with drivers who are inexperienced with the system. I think one of the things about the 2 lanes all the way through downtown now with Main Street is that even though it sometimes functions as 1, sometimes functions as 3, there's that illusion that it's not varying. And I think Northampton being a place where people may come once a month, and they don't necessarily get used to a habitual traffic flow, that it's sometimes, I just noticed, it's very challenging for them when they come, for instance, that Main and King intersection, to flare out those 3 lanes. There's basically, they almost halt because they don't know quite which way to go, and they don't know how to commit. So I'm just wondering, how do you sign those intersections? How do you provide information so that those inexperienced drivers are not substantially impeding your sort of design flow through the intersection?
One thing Northampton is lacking today is any lane designation signing whatsoever. And of course, in the current weather, you can't even see the pavement markings if they had designated the same. It's very easy at a point like this to have a sign to that driver to know what to do, when to fan out. And it just so happens this design has that point on every approach into Main Street that says, okay, from here on in, you've been yielding to all the pedestrians, thank you. Now, left lane, left, center lane through, right lane, right, or through right, whichever. So I think signing a few key spots would be huge. And also remember, the profile of the street beyond is just 2 lanes, not 4. So hopefully you're really getting people to think it's always a 2-lane road.
Yeah, as a traffic engineering study, you've taken this really to the geometric design level here at intersections and all of that. I'm wondering at what point there becomes a transition to some of the urban design issues. I'm particularly interested in the fact that downtown Northampton is listed on the National Register of Historic Places. It's a 19th century, early 20th century town.
Right.
And I'm just wondering about the scale and character of some of the street fixtures, light standards, other kinds of things like that, that might be appropriate to recommend in this particular context, as opposed to someplace that would be a completely new context. Do you get into that, or?
I'm not an urban designer per se, but I work with them all the time.
Sure.
I don't know all the lingo, but I can talk a little bit about streetscape design. I do it from a transportation perspective. For instance, from a transportation perspective solely of what you have in your downtown, the through pedestrian capacity of your sidewalks is insufficient given the amount of passive activity that happens on your sidewalks. There's a lot of conflict there. So it would be nice if your sidewalks, where they're 10 and 12 feet today, were just for walking, but they're not. People are also milling and lingering and talking on them because there's not a lot of extra space to be able to separate those functions. So from a transportation perspective, it's already in conflict. When I look at it from a design perspective, we actually have another cross-section that Mike's working on. I just turned to him to see if we could use it, and he's still working on it. It'll look like a bunch of lines still. But it'll be in the final report and all. From a transportation perspective, from a design perspective, when you look at just the massing of the buildings and the breadth of the space that's in there, it is all about cars. I mean, I don't know if we can go to one of these. Where did I have an aerial? Here. I mean, just think about this. Walking zone building, right? Car, walking zone really short building. If you talk about this experience of the density, and these are not incredibly dense buildings compared to most downtowns, but you got this density, a little bit of space to walk and tons of space to drive in, a little bit more space to walk, and then you're done. You're at the next building wall. And that relationship, if I were to wear an urban designer hat that I'm not officially ever allowed to wear, I would say is off. We looked at some historical pictures of Main Street, and it's always been like this. In fact, years ago, there wasn't even the sidewalk. It was just, dirt, of course. And we can't figure it out because you could have turned a horse and carriage around like 8 times crossing the street. So I don't understand why that relationship is there. Concord, New Hampshire, again, is another place that has it. Most downtowns don't have that kind of distance. So to make up for it, the more you look like a little bit more of a downtown where your rooms also become outdoor rooms, the less of that space in between is just dedicated to the automobile and getting through your downtown. I mean, most of those downtowns also can't have angled parking on both sides. So that's still a lot of width.
Yeah, I think I was more oriented towards light standards, street furniture, things like that, appropriate design that would fit within the character and scale of the town. Maybe just the colors of the light standards, reusing some of the historic posts that are down there. And I don't think you've touched on street lighting or other things.
Yeah, that's
like
exactly
that.
where I was going to touch on. You reminded me of that. I mean, certainly a consistent palette of design is helpful and makes it more predictable and understandable so you can do other things. So if you know that this is where your bike goes and it's consistent, you don't have to think about looking for a bike rack as much. And if you know that this is where the trash barrel is because it's a consistent look, helps you not get too lost in your downtown so you can do more productive things besides throw away your trash. But lighting is a tremendously important thing to think about, especially in downtown. Again, just like the idea of building big roads for cars or building head-in angle parking in your downtown was all getting the car moving, the lighting for roadways and downtowns and on highways has been all, let's get that car space lit up. Why? We've got halogen headlights now. I mean, maybe once our headlights weren't so good. But you put a Cobra up there and cast this beam of light all over everything, why does the car need that? The pedestrian gets long shadows, isn't as brightly lit as they could be, and so many downtowns have both. This big light, and then they try to improve the pedestrian scale lighting, which sometimes helps. This downtown, or any downtown, would look amazing at night, but would also be incredibly safe. I've only seen this in Falmouth, Mass, not incredibly well, where they've started to put in just the downtown lighting on the sidewalks. Light the pedestrian space so the motorists can see the pedestrians, so they know that they're there as opposed to hidden in the shadows. And when there's a crosswalk, light the crosswalk so the motorist knows this is where a pedestrian's going to be. And guess what that also does? It makes the pedestrian not randomly jaywalk anywhere else, but stay in the crosswalks as long as you've made them frequently enough like we have. So lighting that's oriented to the modes that don't shine 500 aluminum halogen lights on their own already makes a lot of sense. And if anything, when do we actually as drivers see things more crystally and clearly in our headlights? When that's the only light that's shining forward. Whereas if you get into like downtowns or you're on the highway and the other lights come on, it's good for lighting up the embankments or something like that. But what's in front of you actually doesn't come in as clearly. It comes in more clearly when your contrast is strictly focused on what's in the beams of your lights. So I'm hoping that Cobras and massive lighting of everything goes away. And of course, if you're into light pollution and all, that'll make you happier. It also cuts energy too. You don't need to spend as much power lighting up everything else. Other thoughts, issues, concerns before I continue talking like an urban designer for too long?
Yeah, Jason, I want to compliment you and your team. I think it's great. And in particular, I would really like to see the wider sidewalks for cafes or parks or whatever. Also, a decrease in the length of the crosswalks. And looking forward to your report. I just wanted to ask you, when you go back to the beginning of Main Street, West Street intersection, as you're coming down, you have a designated bike lane. And right now, there's a bike box, which would become a crosswalk in a new design. Can you talk a little bit about the bike box?
I haven't drawn them in here, not so much because I was forgetful of them, but because I know that, and it was actually the same report that was talking about cycle tracks versus bike lanes. Bike boxes continue to be a confusing item. I think in heavy biking country like the Netherlands, they're getting them. If you're a smart cyclist, you know them and you use them. So they're an optional feature that basically sets the car stop bar back a minimum of 10 feet and allows a cyclist who's in a lane, ideally, so it's usually connected by a bike lane, to then at a red light, get in front of the cars and then proceed safely in front of the cars, usually for a left-hand turn. You don't have to get in the bike box if you don't want to. It impacts the signal a little bit because you're losing 10 feet of stop bar and increasing your clearance intervals for cars, so it adds a little bit of delay. I think it's really, really smart in the right location, and it's a tool you should have in your toolbox eventually. It's very easy to do because you're pulling back the stop bar, you're not touching the crosswalk. So it's something to throw in there, and we had this design done just that, bike boxes.
Right.
That allow the bicyclists to come up and then sort of bike diagonally over to here and then go ahead of the cars on the left. It works in that regard really, really well. It doesn't work when it's all green and you want to turn left. Then as a bicyclist, you've got to work your way across traffic like a lot of cyclists may do already today. But given the way that intersection works, it's always a little bit slow, so it's not so hard to do, and you might know the light cycle and know that you can get here and then go across.
So I missed it. Is the bike box in the new design too?
No, I haven't included it. No.
Right.
Can you just explain how it's really supposed to work? I don't understand.
Oh, sorry, I wish I had had it up while I was just going for it. So a cyclist coming down the hill, if there's a red light, the cyclist can stop and then bike over to this spot. And then when the green light comes up, they're ahead of the queue of cars behind them. So they can actually turn safely ahead of the cars.
So the cars stop before the bike bar?
Yeah, this
leaving
is
it open?
This is the stop bar now.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, except that most people don't know that, and a lot of bicyclists just stay in the bike lane.
Right. But I mean, if you're going straight, you'd stay in the bike lane anyway. So it's really an optional kind of feature.
While you're at that intersection, explain to me about the coming down from Elm and you're at the stoplight and you want to make a right turn on the South Street. And I'm interested in the treatment of the pedestrian island there. I just wanted some more explanation.
So what we're talking about is actually channelizing it. So the right turner would at West Street go across the dashed bike lane and get into the right lane, much like they do today. But the difference is that as they approach here, they're seeing yield to pedestrian signs and advance notification. And then on the actual turn, where they're forced to slow down anyways, to turn on the south, that's where you actually raise the road bed up, sort of like a raised device. And the crosswalk across here is a raised crossing. And many people do that with pavers and texture, which I sort of tried to draw in there as well. It can just be paved asphalt with stripes, just like any other crosswalk. But usually you want some sort of visual cue to the driver. This is a special place. Slow down.
But it's not a whole raised table.
It's just the crosswalk. Yeah, it's just 10, 15 feet wide, usually on max. It's got slopes on both ends. You're already going slow. It's not actually a traffic calming feature already, because you're already going slow unless you're trying to rock it through the slip lane. It prevents that, and that encourages the yielding to the pedestrian.
Sure. All of your explanations of reverse angle parking make a lot of sense, and I've read about it before, and even though it's new, it does make sense. In this design, people are engaging in reverse angle parking from the one travel lane. Does the research figure out that's, I mean, I can certainly imagine reverse angle working in the sort of sloppy spare lane that we currently have.
Right.
But but when it's the only travel lane and somebody's trying to navigate backwards, and this is perhaps the only place in Western Mass where they're doing that, so they're kind of unfamiliar with it. Is normal traffic flow still going to be possible?
It's going to really depend on the following drivers. You know, today, when somebody's backing out of a head-in angle space, what does the following driver do? Oh, a lot of them will wait, a lot of them will try to go around.
Yeah.
And if there's a car next to you, you can't go around, so you wait. Same with parallel parking. Somebody's backing up. You either wait for them or maybe you sneak around. So what we provided was enough room to be able to let the car sneak around. That's all. So the idea is it's not huge. It's basically a safe 14 or it could be more feet out from the back of the other reverse angle parked car to the center line. And that car who's backing in generally will never take up more than half of that space. So you can probably go around without crossing the center line. Some people will cross the center line. Some people will just wait, again, because the reverse angle parking maneuver is the fastest parking maneuver of all three anyways.
Is the degree of angle, just a quick question, degree of angle of Uber parking basically just the same degree as regular angle?
Yeah, same angles. We've drawn these all at 60 degree, which is, or 30 degree from perpendicular, which is the most efficient and still has the benefit of the angle parking.
Yeah, you'll find that at most military installations around the country, where they have their parking is always the reverse angle.
I know the Boston Police Department, Dudley Square, have been doing it for
Well,
years.
every policeman will park that way anyway.
It's the hot way to
They're
get
trained
out.
to that. Exactly, yes. Acceleration.
Sir?
Is there a city where reverse angle parking is the standard?
Dozens throughout the U.S.
On the East Coast?
There's a few in Pennsylvania now, the most famous of which is Pottstown, I think, where they did a lot of data and collected and determined half the numbers I can quote you on. And they've been doing it now for 30 years, I think, almost as a result. Who else has got it, other than, like I say, in Boston?
New York City's
been switching. New York City has probably been switching, yeah. And then, ironically, you get out into Autoland, Indianapolis has been doing it forever, and a lot of the communities are out there. It's actually kind of spread throughout America. I can't really say there's a cluster. You'll probably find a little bit more on the West Coast, but not really. It's all over the place. One of the best places for it is Vancouver, Washington. Or is that Vancouver? It's up there. I can't remember. Anyways, one of those.
It's very common in Europe.
Yeah.
Yep. We were just in London, and it's all over London.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Buys you space and safety, and it's quicker. I mean, yes, you have to back into your space as opposed to back out of it. It's really the difference. Other thoughts? It's still not 7, which means you could ask me questions, but hey, we could get through this quickly. Ma'am.
What's the next step? It seems like a really great plan.
Yeah, Charrette is basically to try to do 90% of the work in the 3 days, which we're pretty much at. And then we're going to just try to document this in a report, get it to the city, and you'll get to see it all. This slideshow may be online tomorrow, for all I know. Other comments, sir?
Thank you for your presentation. It was very good. The ideas are very, very good. What about jitney buses, mass transit? If fuel, oil prices stay high, I could just see more smaller jitney buses coming in from the outer edges of the town, of the city to downtown.
Financing transit, community transit, is almost always best done on the backs of parking. That's where most local transit systems have been financed, some of them 100% that way. Where you don't have a lot of parking demand and it's harder to charge for parking, it's harder to provide transit, it's all a relationship of density most of the time that goes hand in hand. I've talked about Boulder, for instance. They had no transit. They had a tough downtown. They had some big employers that wanted more parking garages, and the municipality said to the employers, here's the books on parking. It's $20,000 or more a space, which is about $150 a month just on the debt service alone. This is the kind of investment we have to make, and the employers all said, you're kidding. And they said, yeah, you get to decide what to do. And the employers all said, okay, we're going to pay our employees $50 to not drive and take the bus. We're going to spend $50 on beautiful walkability improvements in downtown Boulder, and then we're going to pocket the other $50 because we don't want to pay you $150 a month for that parking. And as a result, it was a win-win-win. The employees got their transit subsidized 100%. They all have an eco-pass, and they just jump on the bus. The other $50 that they didn't pocket that went to other improvements, the vast majority of it went to RTD, the regional transit employer that serves. Actually, the employee share as a part of that. And suddenly, Boulder got a whole bunch of smaller, shorter buses. This is now going on 12 years now. The hop, the skip, the dash, the jump, they all run around, and their mode shares are nuts. 25% of the people ride buses. Their driving is down to like 40% of all people bother to drive. So it's financeable, but it usually has something to do with parking. Or a lot of grants from the feds. That help you? Gas prices always motivate a shift to transit too. Thank you very much, everybody.